You have just returned from a hunt with your tribe. The meat is enough to feed everyone for the next few days. Tonight, everything seems peaceful. The fire is still burning. For the first time in days, everyone can finally go to sleep with a full stomach. But the next morning, you wake up with a fever. Your whole body aches, your head is spinning. By the third day, you can barely stand. Then another person develops a fever, then a child. Within just a few days, even the strongest members of the tribe begin to collapse. Death quietly spreads from one person to the next. What no one in the tribe realizes is this: the deadliest predator has never had claws or fangs. It is so small that it would take humanity thousands of years to discover it. Today, we know them as bacteria, viruses, and parasites. But to ancient people, they were simply unexplained deaths. What's remarkable is that, even though they had never seen these invisible organisms, many ancient civilizations left behind astonishing records of disease. Some of their observations even matched discoveries that modern science wouldn't make until thousands of years later. So what diseases actually killed people in the ancient world? And how have modern scientists been able to trace them through ancient skeletons and mummies that have remained undisturbed for thousands of years? That's the journey we're about to begin. For most of human history, disease was a complete mystery. When a healthy person suddenly became sick, the only explanations people had were the ones they believed in: angry gods, curses, evil spirits, or an imbalance within the body. Yet even without knowing the real cause, they carefully observed what was happening. They recorded symptoms, searched for treatments, and left behind valuable medical records for future generations. Thousands of years later, archaeologists began excavating ancient mummies and skeletons. With the help of modern technology, they discovered that many of the diseases described by ancient people had truly existed thousands of years ago. And one of the oldest killers to leave unmistakable traces in both mummies and human remains was tuberculosis. It usually began with nothing more than a cough. The sick continued hunting and working as usual, but over time, their bodies grew weaker. Fevers became more frequent, and eventually, blood began to appear with every cough. No one knew what was killing them. Archaeologists have found evidence of this disease in Egyptian mummies and numerous ancient skeletons. DNA analysis has even identified Mycobacterium tuberculosis in mummies that are thousands of years old, showing that this disease has accompanied humanity since the earliest civilizations. Around 2,400 years ago, the Greek physician Hippocrates accurately described symptoms such as a persistent cough, weight loss, and coughing up blood. Yet it wasn't until 1882 that scientist Robert Koch identified the true culprit, the bacterium that causes tuberculosis. It was one of the silent killers of the ancient world. But there was another disease that was even more terrifying. In just a few days, an entire tribe could begin to collapse because of a tiny creature they barely noticed. It was malaria. After a successful hunt, the tribe decides to set up camp beside a body of water. There are fish to catch, animals come here to drink, and everything seems perfect. But when night falls, an unwanted visitor arrives. Just a few days later, people begin to suffer from high fevers, violent chills, and overwhelming exhaustion. No one realizes that the culprit is nothing more than the tiny mosquitoes buzzing around the camp. Today, we know that malaria is caused by the Plasmodium parasite, with mosquitoes acting as the carriers that transmit the disease. Scientists believe that the battle between humans and this parasite began tens of thousands of years ago, perhaps even earlier. Ancient Chinese physicians accurately described the recurring cycles of fever associated with malaria. In the 4th century, the physician Ge Hong documented the use of sweet wormwood as a treatment. More than 1,000 years later, scientists discovered artemisinin, the active compound found in that very plant, revolutionizing the treatment of malaria. It's a remarkable reminder that even without understanding what caused disease, ancient people sometimes found effective treatments simply through careful observation and generations of experience. But not every deadly disease came from insects. Sometimes, Everything began with nothing more than a small bite from an animal living alongside humans. And that disease was rabies. A dog runs through the camp. It bites a hunter on the leg before disappearing into the distance. The wound isn't severe, so no one pays much attention to it. Several weeks later, the man develops a fever. He can no longer sleep, and his behavior becomes increasingly agitated. Whenever someone offers him water, he reacts with terror and desperately tries to avoid it. To ancient people, it was a mysterious disease with almost no explanation. Yet more than 4,000 years ago, the people of ancient Mesopotamia had already recognized that aggressive dogs could spread a deadly illness. This connection was even recorded in some of the earliest legal codes, showing that they had begun to understand the link between an animal bite and death. Today, science has identified the culprit as the rabies virus, which is transmitted primarily through the saliva of infected animals. Once symptoms appear, the disease is almost always fatal, without immediate medical treatment. That is why rabies is still considered one of the deadliest diseases in human history. But some diseases didn't kill their victims quickly. Instead, they forced people to live for years in pain, only to be rejected by the very communities they belonged to. That disease was leprosy. People with this disease usually didn't die right away. It often began with patches of skin that gradually lost all sensation. Over time, the nerves became damaged, the hands and feet slowly became deformed, and even small injuries could no longer be felt. But sometimes, the greatest suffering wasn't caused by the disease itself. It came from being rejected by everyone around them. Many ancient civilizations believed leprosy was a punishment from the gods or the consequence of sin, yet archaeological evidence and modern DNA analysis have shown that the disease existed thousands of years ago and was actually caused by a bacterium. Today, leprosy can be cured if it's diagnosed early, but in the ancient world, it was almost a life sentence, forcing many people to live the rest of their lives in isolation. And there was another disease that silently stole something just as precious, the gift of sight. It was trachoma. In the hot, dusty lands of ancient Egypt, trachoma was incredibly common. It often began with nothing more than itchy, irritated eyes and constant tearing. But after repeated infections, the eyelids gradually turned inward. The eyelashes scraped against the surface of the eye over and over again, eventually leading to blindness. Surprisingly, the ancient Egyptians recorded a variety of treatments in their medical texts. They used honey, minerals, and even plucked eyelashes to reduce further damage. As primitive as these methods may sound, some of them actually had scientific merit, thanks to the natural antibacterial properties of honey and certain copper-based compounds. Ancient people were not simply driven by superstition. They constantly observed, experimented, and built knowledge in their ongoing fight against disease. Settled life gave humans a more reliable food supply, but it also created the perfect environment for disease to spread. People lived closer together, kept livestock beside their homes, and shared the same water sources. Once a single person became infected, an entire community could soon be affected. It was during this period that diseases such as smallpox, typhoid fever, dysentery, and pneumonia began spreading more widely, claiming countless lives. Some of these diseases even traveled with migrating populations, crossing mountains and deserts before reaching lands thousands of kilometers away. Ironically, humanity's first steps toward civilization also exposed people to larger outbreaks than ever before. And even after thousands of years, many of the invisible killers that haunted our ancestors have never truly disappeared. When we look back at the ancient world, we often imagine our ancestors battling wild beasts, natural disasters, and starvation just to survive. But history and archaeology tell a very different story. Humanity's deadliest enemies were the invisible organisms they never even knew existed. From the very first tribes to modern civilization, that battle has never truly ended. What has changed isn't the pathogens themselves, it's our ability to understand them. And perhaps that is one of the greatest victories in the history of human civilization. Thank you for joining me on this journey of discovery. If you enjoy stories about history, science, and the lives of ancient people, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next adventure. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you on our next journey into the past.